Welcome to our weekly panel discussion here at the Iowa City Public Library, where thanks to Susan Craig and Beth Fisher and all their colleagues here at the library, we make this space available to the International Writing Program. For those of you watching at home, you can find full biographies of all the writers, samples of their work, and full calendar of the fall residency at iwp.uiowa.edu. The title of today's panel, Working in Progress, brought to mind the notion that for accountants, a work in progress, also known as a work in process, is usually measured and categorized as a current asset or a long-term asset on a company's balance sheet, depending on how the asset will be used. But we're not interested in accountancy. We are interested in literary works in progress, which inventory our interior landscapes, and alas, usually have no need of an accountant. How does a writer know where and when to start and stop? What if you're not making any progress in a particular work? What's the best and the worst advice you've ever been given as a writer? Those are some of the questions that we will be addressing this afternoon. And just to go down the list of who the writers will be, the first is our Ida Cordelia Beam Distinguished Visiting Professor, Kris Avani, an acclaimed novelist and poet. His most recent books are The Secret History of Las Vegas, The Face, a Memoir, and Sanctificum. He's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Penn Hemingway Award, an Edgar Prize, a Ford USA Writers Fellowship, the Penn Beyond the Margins Award, a Prince Claus Award, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Just kill me now. And a Lannan Literary Fellowship, among many others. Born in Nigeria, he's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a Board of Trustees professor of English and Comparative Literary Studies at Northwestern University. He lives in Chicago. Seated next to him is not seated next to him. Okay, well, we have a different order. Okay. Yamila Bêgné of Argentina is the author of 3 short story collections, most recently Limits of Control, published in 2017, which she has described as a game of forces. That same year, she attended a City University of New York residency on a Nestor Sanchez grant. Bêgné has published many pieces of creative nonfiction and been awarded the Letters and Illustration Prize from the Ministry of Culture in Buenos Aires. She participates in the fall residency courtesy of the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Just trying to figure out our schedule here. Seated next to her is Huang Chong-Kai of Taiwan. He's a member of the Alphabet Lab, a collective of Taiwanese experimental writers and theorists, which publishes serialized novels based on each letter of the French alphabet. He's the author of 4 novels, including Blue Fiction, voted one of the 10 best books of the year by the China Times Book Review, and The Contents of the Times, which was winner of the 2018 TIBE Book Prize for Fiction, and one of Mirror Media's 10 best books of 2017. His participation is made possible by the Taiwanese Ministry of Culture. Seated next to him is Amara Okolo of Nigeria. She's a lawyer and the author of a novel, Black Sparkle Romance, as well as a collection of short stories, Son of Man. She took part in Chimamanda Adichie's creative writing workshop and the Invisible Borders Trans-Africa project, often speaks at book events and festivals, and her work is already being used in classrooms abroad. She takes part in the fall residency courtesy of a grant from the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And finally, we have Takiguchi Yusho of Japan, who writes stories about individual and collective memory marked by sound experimentation, a roaming, omniscient narrative voice and multiple temporalities. His novella, Resonance, won the 2011 Cincho Prize for New Writers. In 2015, his novella, The Jimi Hendrix Experience, which includes almost no Jimi Hendrix, was nominated for the Akutagawa Prize. In 2016, he won that award for The Unceasing. His participation is made possible by an endowed gift from the William B. Corton Foundation. Please join me in welcoming all of our writers. And we will start with Kris.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey.
I'm already half asleep, so you have to wake up too. Thank you for coming. It's really wonderful to see you all here. A few years ago, I was lucky to be on a very impromptu Poetry Africa tour. The Poetry Africa Festival in South Africa invited a few poets and asked some of us if we would like to go on the road, and we said yes. So they rented a little bus, and then we all bundled in and we drove through multiple countries. We got to Zimbabwe, which is a country, if you're following the news, with a lot of difficulty. And after the first day of presentation, one of the writers who lived in Zimbabwe said, I want to show you all something. So we got in the car and we drove 2 hours outside of Harare. And we came to this large rock in the middle of nowhere that had a small little bar next to it. And so we wandered up, and it's like a sloping rock, and there's nothing much except little rock pools. And so we wandered up this rock. There are no tour guides, there's no fences, there's no wires. And then as we got to the top, there's this little path, and as you go down, you realize that you are now looking at this immensity that is going up. And there are caves riddled everywhere. And there is art all over the walls, over 10,000 years old. And there's no one between you and this art. There is no trash, there is no sign of modern living. There's just a bunch of people wandering around in something akin to awe. And so I was walking and I was drawn particularly, one of my totems is an elephant, and so I'm always drawn to elephants. And I was drawn to this small section next to a tree that was almost invisible, and about this size was this blue elephant. It was an incredibly painted elephant, and the blue seemed so fresh, and this elephant, I was told, is 6,000 years old. And next to it, the painter had signed their artwork by placing their palm in ochre and stamping it next to the elephant. And so I walked up and I touched this elephant, and this is something that was both a desecration and something akin to awe. And I remember that thinking at that moment about this notion of taboo, that every kind of way in which art is made and art is interacted with is a breaking of taboo. It's the thing that allows us to go from the grotesque to the sublime. And so then I put my hand into the handprint, and for some inexplicable reason, I started crying. And I stood there, I must have cried for just 30 minutes, because in this moment, a people who no one will ever know, who have died out, have an unbroken lineage and a connection to a person who somehow, by DNA, is related to them, but can never know them. And this is one of the beautiful things about any kind of art form, is that what you're interacting with is never the thing in front of you, but an unspeakable, ineffable thing behind it. So when you come to writing as a writer, for me, I shouldn't say as a writer because that would suggest I'm speaking for everybody. What happens is that you realize that you're always drawn to something, an idea, a feeling you can't explain, a smell, but it's always out of reach. And this is a beautiful thing. It's like trying to describe what a pear tastes like to someone who's never had a pear. In this case, you're the person who's both had and not had a pear. And so it's you're chasing this thing, and so all you're ever really doing is approximating. And so all you're hoping for is a certain kind of approximation. And then with this starts to come your personality and ritual, because I think all these things, words like progress and process and ritual, all get mushed together. So oftentimes when writers are asked a question about process, what we're really asking the questions about ritual. When do you write? What time of day do you write? What do you need to write? And these are really ways in which writers have created, I think, artists as a whole, a way to retreat from day-to-day life into this kind of strange place that is so nebulous, you yourself, you can't describe it. And then there is your personality. And if you're like me, you lie on the couch and watch a lot of television and call it research. But it is really that you've learned that this is how you work, that things will percolate in your subconscious for a time. And then you'll be drawn to read things, to watch things. And it seems almost like something beyond your own control is working, but it's really just your unconscious mind, which is incredibly smart, leading you to assemble all these things. And it's annoying because you can't describe what is going on. And so if you realize what your personality is, you learn to relax. And in my case, you just start writing one day, and you have 300 pages, and then you spend years trying to whittle it out. And if you're like my brother, who likes things to be in straight lines all the time, you write every day, but you're just writing words sometimes. And then there's a whole part of it, which is progress. And progress is so linked to product in a way that it's often not a useful thing. But I think sometimes when you live in cultures like a capitalist American system in that way, it's hard not to think of product. And so then neurosis kicks in, because you suddenly, so like you're engaging with all these different things, and we can talk about that in much more. But so I think for me, ultimately, it's really about, if you think about it in a sense, the understanding of shadow, and the inability to find shadow. And I literally mean this in terms of your own shadow. In Igbo, we say, "Nwata kele anaha balaham bembe ya noso. Manobo makaiha kaine wanwole kaine tugo kaina fumado nanya." A child can never outrun their own shadow. And it is because of this that we have joy, that we have fear, that we rise to glory, that we learn to love each other. So I think for me, always what I'm doing is trying to make something that someone will stumble upon perhaps somewhere, like I stumbled upon an elephant, and they'll put their hand on it, and for some inexplicable reason that I will never witness and never know, they will find transformation. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Lee, also for your lovely editing. I was thinking, was this lovely story that Kris Avani just told us. It made me think of this amazing movie, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, by Werner Herzog. Really a man of working in progress or in process. So, well, I'm just going to read my presentation. Just don't do it. I don't mean to argue with the title of this panel, but I would like to speak about process rather than progress. The word process, to me, seems a way of saying that there is something that we have to accomplish in the end, a result. Also, it implies that this result should be a positive one, an assertive one. Talking about progress, for me, would be a teleological way of speaking about writing. And writing, I think we would all agree, is nothing like that. So, works in process then. What I like the most about process is the fact that, unlike progress, it is invisible, or at least it seems invisible. One of our jobs when we write is to shed some light on process, to think about the singular way in which every text that we write gets written. As readers, process is not something evident in a text. It is not there. Well, sometimes it is. You know this metafiction trend. But even in this case, we only have access to the words someone is able to say about process, or to the ones that look good on paper, really. You guess it. I love process, but it's like metafiction a lot. Although one could say that metafiction is the exact literary form to address process. But to me, I don't know. Fiction on fiction or writing on writing is just like having French fries with a side of mashed potatoes while the chef lectures me all about deep frying and boiling. Real process happens beyond the paper itself. And that is why, for me, it is crucial to try to understand something, only something, about the when, the how, the where, and the why of writing. Process, then, is not only invisible for us as readers, but also for us as writers while we write. Process is not about sitting down, getting in front of the computer, and starting to move your fingers, our fingers. We can control process. Process, and this is another thing I love about it, doesn't have a certain place it happens, or a certain precise action. For me, for example, the shower is a crucial place for process. Maybe it's something in the water, I don't know. Or maybe it's the fact of being in a place where it is absolutely impossible to actually perform the act of writing. Things happen when I'm taking a shower, or when I'm working out. Forms, structures, sentences, characters, or plot when there is one. These things fall into a place. For me, this is a very important thing to know. We write even when we are not writing. We only have to discover what works for us, because what is true about writing is also true about process. There is no universal formula. We just have to wait and see. Wait, let it lay there, resting. Take a step back. In my process, distance is a key. I know it is not very hip of me to quote Theodor Adorno here today. He hated jazz, only liked Schoenberg, always criticized Walter Benjamin for not being methodic enough. You know, I always imagine Benjamin when receiving Adorno's letters, like, oh, not good enough for Teddy. Poor him. Not a fun guy, Adorno, to have beers with, I imagine. But Adorno had a point. As we all know, he argued that matter should transform into form. Or, in other words, he argued that form is matter after sedimentation, and that any type of art should turn to form when working to communicate something. I'm bringing up Adorno because I think this may be an effective way to think about process too. See, process as something that has to be translated into form, into rhythm, into syntaxis, into words. But how can we do it? Well, maybe we don't have to. As persons who live in this society, we are used to trying, to working, to being told, just do it in every aspect of life. We are used to thinking that we have to act in tangible ways in order to get things done. For me, that is not the case when writing. In fact, it is the opposite. In a way, writing is about finding other ways to do things, beyond the obvious, beyond the visible. Texts don't always need to be finished. Sometimes they need to be finished badly, so that we can learn something from the worst version of the thing. How do we transform a specific personal writing process into form? How do we sediment it? For me, the key lies in tangential, indirect movements, actions that don't act, waiting, taking the wrong way, putting distance between myself and the text, and of course, taking a shower. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And after Yamila, I think I really agree with her. So my title is Trust the Process. Yeah. Recently, I read an article written by Joel Embiid, an NBA player who is the center on the Philadelphia 76ers. A Cameroon teenager who barely knew how to play basketball. The only skill he had was dunking. Embiid accidentally got a basketball scholarship in the United States and eventually became a famous NBA player. Embiid doubled himself the process after he missed his first 2 NBA seasons due to injury. And his Twitter slogan is, "Trust the process." Professional sports make me think of writing. An NBA team plays 82 games a season. Each game lasts 2 hours, including resting time. If you were the key player of your team, you might play 35 to 40 minutes a game. It's very much like he is facing a blank word file. He is about to create. Sometimes you observe the player create a masterpiece. Each game gradually sets the player's style. After a period of years, if he keeps playing well, people will recognize him as a good player. This process is not unlike the writing process. After words and pages, after stories and books, if you keep delivering good work, then people will recognize you as a good writer. When professional players don't play, what do? They do weight training to make their body strong enough to outrun other players for at least 82 games a year. They practice basic skill over and over until they can dribble, shoot, and pass without any hesitation. They watch game video, learn how to handle various tactics and moves. They study how the legendary players interpret and control the game. When writers don't write, what do? We don't have the professional team to give us training programs. We have to figure a way to train ourselves. From my perspective, a writer must read important works thoroughly, just as Embiid studied his idol, Kobe Bryant. We must examine how a great author chose his words, how he composed and created a whole universe. Perhaps we should all follow the advice Kobe gave Embiid after they finally met. Okay, young fella, keep working, keep working. After 2 weeks in Iowa City, the Mongolian poet Bayazgalan Basuli asked me, "Have you written anything here?" I told her that I had jet lag and had to fight the flu in the first week. In other words, I did nothing. The Armenian writer Alan Bachin, the Argentina writer Yamila Bêgné, and Israeli writer Tehila Hakimi all asked me the same question. And I repeat the answer that I told Bayazgalan. At the bar, electronic music, beers on the table, the Lithuanian poet Ursula Kazulunande asked all of us, "What do you do on the day before you came to Iowa?" I say I finished a short story and revised it until deep into the night. This short story is my 26th and last piece of the collaborative project Alphabet Lab, 3 years in the making. After a long night of editing, I got up to catch the high-speed train to the airport, the first train of the day. Traveling from Taiwan to Tokyo Narita to Dallas Fort Worth Airport took over 25 hours. Then I waited in a long custom line, passed the security check and waited for my delayed flight to Iowa. I kept napping and waking myself. Then I noticed there was a man nearby writing. He typed from top to bottom, line by line, right to left in a blank Word document. I checked the IWP website and find out this man is my fellow panelist, Takiguchi Yusho. I secretly admired him in my heart, for he could write while exhausted and traveling. The writing process starts by conquering all kinds of limitations. Then you get an opportunity to discover something by writing. Writing may be the best self-education. When you want to know something deeper, you write. Therefore, you begin with what you don't know. You might not even know you have begun writing. This is the best and the briefest moment of the process, when you are completely in the world that you create, living in another space, a waking dream. No matter how you write, every write has a different tempo. If you saw the writer dance last night, you will know that. Yeah. The work itself witnesses the process. I recommend following the example of Portuguese novelist José Saramago. He writes 2 pages a day. It makes several months or years to complete your work this way. But your health has to withstand long-term self-exploitation. Even if you feel no progress has been made, even if you can write a good sentence, at least you train your determination. One last thing, do not trust the inspiration. We cannot work with something which doesn't promise to show up every day. As the American painter and photographer Chuck Close said, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. In other words, trust the process. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Kai. Work in progress. I have been serializing work every month in a Japanese literary magazine since this spring. This is the first time in my career that I have taken on the challenge of having to write a certain amount each month. 6 instruments have already been published, and since coming to Iowa, I have sent 2 more drafts in. Sorry, it's right. Yesterday is my deadline, but I didn't yet. Sorry, Kai, I am lazy. Originally, I intended to write a series of standalone essays. My partner and I were considering moving at that time, so I decided to center the first column around the house I was living in, and the landlord who lived below me. I was very attached to my house, having lived there a long time. The house became the subject of my second column as well. There was so much I had to say about it that it didn't all fit in my first column. And then the same thing happened with my second column. I ended up writing about the house in the next 2 essays as well. The series gradually digressed into other topics. I wrote about the wrinkly face of a neighborhood dog. the day I went cherry blossom viewing with friends, and later that night when one of those friends, parent to a small child, was unexpectedly moved to tears. The narration also changed in point of view, and I was no longer the sole storyteller. Through my pen, my partner and friends' voices came to life. At that point, instead of reiterating anecdotes from my daily life, I began to tell stories I have never heard before. Apparently, I wasn't dealing with a series of essays here. Before I knew it, it seems I had a novel on my hands. I never begin novels with a plan, nor a plot, nor do I decide what kind of ending I'm heading towards. But I don't approach novels like a shaman. There's no spirit writing through me while I'm unconscious. I take responsibility for my text. I pay attention to its every nook and cranny. When I begin a new work, rather than have a concrete scenario in mind, I have a vague premonition. Of course, I think about specific characters and scenes in advance, but they don't necessarily make it to the page. Until I start writing, I don't know what will happen. Yet, even after I start, I can't predict where the novel will go. For example, when a musician makes a sound and follows it with a different sound, it isn't for any logical reason, but as a sort of response to the previous sound. Isn't each movement of the dancing body a painting brush and improvisation, determined by the movements that came before it? The same applies to writing. When I write, each sentence is in response to each sentence is in response to sentence I have already written. It is an uncertain and unreliable process, but that indefinability is what makes writing so vital. In novels, fiction embeds reality and reality embeds fiction. I believe this is not just limited to the world of novels, but rather reflects the state of reality and time that we live in. That is to say, we imagine things that aren't there. Our lives are dictated by constant remembering. We can't stop thinking about what's missing. It has become our way of life, and yet it's an unreliable way to live. When I write, I rely on unreliable. I rely on the memories of things that have disappeared. The most important thing in that process is that words from someone or somewhere directed towards somewhere else are created and strung together. I don't invest a lot of meaning into the dividing lines between reality and fiction, or essays and novels. I think rather than just writing, it's as if I'm hearing someone's voice come out from somewhere. Being a good companion to that voice is key. I don't know what's in store for the piece I am writing now. However, I trust the voice that I hear. I will leave it up to the person. Thank you.
everyone. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful being here. I'm supposed to have a picture come up, but I'll just start reading. Once again, I'm excited to be here, and I'm grateful that I got the opportunity to be with everyone here. And so here I go. Working in progress. Si kele onye ntichiri, enu anugi, alaganu. Salute the deaf. If the heavens don't hear, the earth would hear. Igbo proverb. A work in progress. September 16th, 2017. I was sitting on the threshold of my grandfather's house, staring at the right corner of the faded pink walls that opened a view to a mango tree, a dozen palm trees, a large expanse of green shrubbery, and the mounds of stones that marked my mother's grave. The funeral was yesterday. The earth under the stones were reddish-brown clay. Underneath the green shrubbery were the graves of my uncle who had died from pneumonia in 1975 and my grandmother from diabetes in 1994. It was about 8:30 p.m. Sorry, this is supposed to be 8:30 a.m. And my village was quiet. The men had gone to their shops at the small village, Afiore, we call it, just off the tarred road, a road I could see from here, where the food track began from my grandfather's compound and ended beside a gutter. The women had either gone to the limestone quarry at the other side of town or to their farms. I was alone at the front yard, watching the shadows of trees left on the clay under my bare feet, listening to the birds that called to each other from the palm trees. In my hands were photographs I had found in my mother's boxes. The boxes had been caked with dust. She had packed them in 2004 when we had become temporarily homeless while saving up money, looking for a new house. She traveled down to the village and stored them away in the second room of my grandfather's house. The photos were still good. Thankfully, she had wrapped them up in cellophane bags. My mother, a preserver. Under the photographs was a large cellophane bag, and in it was a stack of papers stapled together in a book-like format. On the cover was a childish illustration of a woman and a little girl, and at the top was written in an equally childish cursive, "The Fate of Ngozi." This is where I'll begin. I am no stranger to the world of writing. At 8 years, 10 months old, I began a work in progress, which finally became the manuscripts I held in my hands that morning of September 16th, 2017. As a child, I had started the book with a starry-eyed curiosity that ended the moment I was done writing it. My mother noticed my abilities as a writer and saved the book. I never saw it again until the morning after her funeral. My brother and I had been looking for pictures to take home with us, things to forever remind us of the mother we once had. And then I opened the box and I saw the manuscripts. A year ago, in August 2017, precisely, I made up my mind never to write again. I had written my eulogy for my mother, the things we never say, as a way of shutting the door, saying goodbye to a world I had lived, the 8-year-old girl who wrote The Fate of Ngozi. Sitting in my apartment I once shared with her, I apologized to my mother's picture for this decision. I spoke to her in spirit, asking that she understand. What more could I possibly write about? Life as I had known it had crumbled down to ashes. Sickness and death had flayed me. I was a prisoner to my own emotions, dead inside. silence was the only language I could speak. Until that silent morning of September 16, 2017. A work in progress. My grandmother once said in Igbo, "Ona bu asinwata wuba ahu, osaba afoya." This translates to, when you tell a child to wash his body, he washes his stomach. It is a way to say that a child is not equipped to make his own decisions because he is young and fragile and will only understand the world from a child's perspective. This was true for me as a writer. Before sickness and death came into my life, I understood my writing from the vantage point of a free spirit. I believed the world was, even though treacherous, a clash of beautiful lights, reflected in my writing because I wrote romance. To me, love was not just a feeling, it was a force of euphoric endless joy. Then sickness and death came in and showed me the lengths love should go. How love smelled like the choking antiseptic in hospitals. How love was carrying your mother in your arms as a baby, even though she weighed more than you because she could not walk. Love was faith. Love was endurance. Love was just being there. How can you stop a truth from being told when it is speaking for itself? I realized quickly that my writing was less about me and more about the people in my life, the people I had met. And that was when I knew I could never stop. I began writing again. My work in progress is the first section of this presentation. I have decided that the only time to stop writing is when I have nothing more to say. My pen will cease when the words dry up. The moment I begin to think of how to convey a message on paper without drifting into a place of light and nothingness, I will go back fully to my legal career. But now I will never stop. I am not just writing a work in progress. I am a work in progress. I am the pages I type on at dawn every morning, the ink that dents the paper when I rewrite dialogues of my characters. I am writing what compels me, what frightens me, what beguiles me, what makes me feel alive, and I will only stop when I feel nothing anymore. Because on that silent morning of September 16th, 2017, just under the manuscript titled The Fate of Ngozi in the cellophane bag, was written the best advice I have ever received. It was a little note written by my mother, probably in 2004, just before she packed the boxes up. Probably before, probably after, I would never know. The message is engraved in my heart. I hope it stays in yours. Ada, in case you ever get tired, I want to know where it all began. It began here. You are talented. Never stop writing. Thank you.
What a fabulous set of presentations. A reminder that the presentations can be found online at iwp.uiowa.edu. And while you're assembling questions in your minds, which Lee will catch you with the microphone, I wanted to call your attention to some upcoming events, and also to note, to thank Downing Thomas, Dean of International Programs, who made the pizza in the back possible. Kris Avani, who gave us that fabulous presentation, will be reading today at 5 o'clock in the Dai House, not in Shamba House, because we anticipate a larger crowd. Sunday, we return to Prairie Lights, where Gina Cole and Tahila Hakami will be joined by the Writers Workshop student Siyanda Mahutitswa. On Sunday night at Cinematheque, Tahila and Rumena Buzarowska will present Jet, The Trial of get, Vivian M. Salam. And there will be no events next Friday because the writers will be traveling to Seattle or to New Orleans, but we'll be back 2 Fridays hence. So with that, questions?
Do you hear me? Thank you for all writers. This panel was moving to me. And thank you, Kris Avani, for being here with us. Amara, I was moved, and you made me cry again. I'll have to stop attending to your readings. My question, though, to all the other writers, at some point in your life, did you ever thought of stop writing? Did you have this question or this decision at some point of your life? And if so, what made you come back to writing, to this decision? And thank you.
Anybody want to take that on?
Just like very quickly. No, that never happened to me, but I also never decided to continue. So,
Well, just like the story said, I did have a moment where I felt like I'm not going to do this again. And then, of course, did.
Actually, I never wanted to be a writer because I want to be a historian or basketball player. Yeah, but I'm very short. Yeah, so I gave up the dream and start to write. Yeah.
Sorry, in Japanese, and he translated. やめようと思ったことは、ないんですけれども、ただ、続けることが自分の意思であるっていうよりかは、いつ書けなくなってもおかしくはないっていうふうに思っているので、あまり自分の意思で続けられないっていうのはわからないと思ってます。Sorry. いつ書けなくなるかわかる。いつ書けなくなっても不思議じゃない。いつ書けなくなることもあり得る。
いつかやめたらそれは不思議ではないということです。
書けなくなったらやめるしかない。
So if I come to the point where I can't continue writing, then there's nothing to be done but to quit.
書けなくなったら続けたくても書けなくなるかもしれないっていつも思ってます。
And so you're always thinking that maybe there'll come a point where you aren't able to continue, and so that's always on your mind.
Okay.
Thank you all. It was really inspiring. And my question is for Yusho. I really like the way you speak about your writing process, and I find it very familiar, and I am also writing like this. My question is, how do you know the story is complete? How do you come to the end? What is your...
いつ終わるか。I don't know. So when my story is finished, I find it. I understand. I find. I notice. 気づく。
Notice, yeah.
I noticed when my story was done. I noticed. Not I don't have plan of ending. Just I noticed when the text is complete.
This question is for all of you. If there is a point, if and when you begin to think about your reader and how you imagine that and how that affects your writing.
Yeah, sometimes I notice most times if I write, I actually draw out my characters, and then I make these characters sort of like, okay, they are my readers, like, how would they feel and how would they take this work? And yeah, I imagine that whoever is reading my work would want to feel something that I am feeling at the point I'm writing that work. So I kind of leave something of me in the story. And maybe because I'm an artist and I paint and I draw, I always try to paint a picture, not just tell a story, or I try to show it as much as possible, the colors of whatever it is I'm seeing, the texture, anything. So I imagine that as I am writing the work and I am having all these feelings and emotions, that's exactly how I want my reader to feel, and also.
I don't think about the reader. I don't find it that useful, but I do think about my weaknesses and my mistakes, and that I think is like an inner way to think about the reader or a possible reader, like, because mistakes or weaknesses in writing maybe also become a problem for a reader, but I think these things inside the text. I try to do it.
I'm a bit in between both. I don't think about readers. In fact, I think that thinking about a reader when you're writing actually interrupts the process and reduces the work in great ways. And my first ever teaching gig in America, my first ever class at the University of Riverside, California. So I was teaching students for whom English is like a third language and come from multiple cultures, and this was a class of undergraduates. I think the oldest was 24, but they were writing memoir, which in itself is beautiful. But of course, they were very inhibited because there are all these voices of their parents and culture and the way, and so they weren't really getting anywhere. So the first exercise I did was make them face the back of the classroom, squat down, and yell repeatedly, "Fuck the reader." At which point the dean walked in and looked at me and said, "Carry on." So I say that not out of a disrespect for readers, but because I think if you write the book that you want to read, that you feel speaks in a certain way, and you hold that integrity, the book goes into the world and finds readers that you can never imagine. I'm a writer because of Jimmy Baldwin. Jimmy Baldwin could not have imagined that his books would travel 6,000 miles to an African country, and a 10-year-old boy would read a book he shouldn't have been reading at 10 and become a writer. One of the most profound experiences that's ever happened, and I shared this with my friends sitting in the audience, was I had gone on book tour. I'd been teaching actually in Qatar, in Doha. And I had been flying, but I was flying through Saudi Arabia, so I was in the airport in Riyadh. And if you know anything about this airport or about the country, you know how complicated it is to be a woman in public. And so I was in the airport, and there was a woman who all I could see were her eyes. And I became aware that she was tracking my movement across the airport, which is a huge risk for her, a huge, like, public flogging risk. I'm going to the men's room. I become aware that she's following me. I come out of the men's room, and she's standing right by the door. And she reaches her hand out and puts her hand on my arm, which you just have to imagine what risk she's taking, only to say to me, "Becoming Abigail changed my life." And then she's gone. I've never seen her face. That voice always haunts me. And I still think today, what is it about a novella written by a man from West Africa about a 16-year-old girl who's been trafficked into sexual slavery, trying to find herself by tattooing stories of her dead mother onto her own body, travels to Saudi Arabia and is read by a woman, and it moves her enough to cross a crowded airport and risk a public flogging to tell the writer what this has done. So I think this is really what the power of literature is. It is its capacity to leave you, once you have rendered it with integrity, and find the person who needs it. And they will read it. And if you're lucky, you will experience them. And most of the time, you will never know. But the world is changed by these beautiful things in that kind of way. So yes and no, I don't think about them either.
I really agree, Kris and Yamila and Amara. And I think I always imagine a very critical and very rigorous reader in my mind. He or she know my every tactic, strategy, and every move. Yeah. So I have to write at my best to face this very critical reader. Yeah, the only one. I don't know he or she exists or not. But I think in my work in process, we need a counselor more than a reader. Yeah, yeah. And the counselor, and maybe the writer you admire. For example, my counselor is Julio Cortázar and V.S. Naipaul. Yeah, and every time I have any problem, and I can stop, I can write a good sentence, I will take them their book and try to read a story or a page of their work, and then maybe I will find the way to figure out. Yeah. Thank you.
In Japanese, 書いているときに自分は書き手でもあるけれども、自分もまた読み手であって、なので考えている、読者のことは考えているけれども、自分と別の人というよりは自分が読者である。そうですね。
So when I write, I'm the writer, but I'm also a reader, and so even as I write the novel, I'm thinking of it from the perspective of a reader as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think we could probably go on all day, but the bell is ringing, and again, these presentations will be online starting next week, and please come and join us this afternoon at 5 when Kris reads at the Dye House. Big hand for all of our writers.